Hello folks, it's Saturday and that means it's time for me to talk about an episode of an animated superhero cartoon. Today I will be talking about the Season 2 episode of the Legion of Superheroes cartoon titled Cry Wolf. The episode opens with Timberwolf's father at a science convention of some kind, where Timberwolf comes out of nowhere and attacks. Then we find out what we are seeing is video footage, and that Timberwolf killed his father, and is now on trial by the Legion of Superheroes. Timberwolf escapes and attempts to prove his innocence with the help of Phantom Girl and Chameleon Boy. We find out that his father is actually alive, and staged a murder so that Timberwolf would be forced to return, but not out of love. Father wanted Timberwolf to return and be a general in his army of synthetic monster soldiers, and then begin taking over the universe, I think. The Legion realizes Timberwolf is innocent, and then all is right with the world, more or less. So I actually like the premise of this episode. In my reviews of Season 1, I mentioned that when you're telling stories in an advanced culture that is made up of many alien civilizations and is also set 1,000 years in the future, you've got many opportunities to tell different kinds of stories besides what people expect with lasers and spaceships. Sure, you can still use those items, but there are other genres that can be explored, but with a twist of being set 1,000 years in the future and being mixed in with other alien cultures. In the previous season, we saw this with what was basically a haunted house set in the middle of outer space. And this episode goes the route of classic 1930s detective noir type stories. It doesn't really go as far as I'd like, but we get a few scenes that are the 31st century versions of any given Humphrey Bogart movie from the 1930s, and that's a lot of fun to see. I just wish we could have had more of that than what we got. Now, despite liking the premise for this episode well enough, I do have a major problem with it. When I first watched the Season 2 premiere, something entered my mind. For one, the season premiere was setting up a season-long story that wasn't really present in Season 1. Sure, we had a very loose storyline of Superboy having fun in the future, but that wasn't really something that connected the episodes. Here, we have a clear and present danger in the form of Imperiex, who is loose in the 31st century, and in the two-part season opening, we kept hearing the Legionnaires talk about how dangerous it was for him to be left roaming around, and how they had to find him yesterday. And then this episode features over half the team wasting their time trying to put a fellow team member on trial. I get that if you find out your teammate committed murder, then you're gonna want to deal with that. But is that more important than finding Imperiex and putting him back where he belongs? And let's just say that with Cosmic Boy being the kind of guy who puts protocol above everything else, maybe he would think that this is more important than dealing with Imperiex. But Superman from the 41st century definitely wouldn't. He was the guy who thought that going to get backup to help defeat Imperiex was a bad idea. Why would he be wasting his time here helping the team find Timberwolf? And when exactly did this hot-headed anus we saw in the Season 2 opening become the voice of reason? Something else that crossed my mind while watching this episode was Timberwolf's ability to transform into a bigger wolf-like creature. We saw that he could do this in the episode that introduced him in Season 1, but I had honestly forgotten that he had this power. This is the problem when you have 10 or so main characters in a series where episodes only run 20 minutes long and there are only 13 episodes per season. Timberwolf just doesn't get a whole lot to do in Season 1, so after his introduction, I had no reason to remember that he could Hulk out like that. So when he starts doing it here, I wasn't sure if his father was manipulating his DNA, or if this was something that he's been struggling with all along. Timberwolf finds a recording of his father saying that if Timberwolf had never joined the Legion, they could have found a way to keep control over his animal side. But I don't know if that was planted there as a trick to make Timberwolf doubt himself if he found that information, or if Timberwolf was really having problems with his animal side. If so, I find it hard to believe that it's been, 2 years in between Season 1 and 2? We don't really know how much time has passed, but it's long enough for a few of our characters to look drastically older. So it's been like 2 years since Timberwolf left his father on that world, and all of a sudden he's having trouble with his animal side? I don't buy it. This is a problem with jumping forward in time off screen. If you want to tie into a plot point from before the time jump, it makes things very difficult to accept from a narrative standpoint. My biggest complaint here is something that I fear is going to be a problem for this entire season. When you have a season with a set number of episodes, and you have a storyline that is supposed to take place over the season, you really have no other option than to do that storyline. And if you don't, if you decide to ignore the story that you set up that seemed pretty urgent when you set it up, like this episode decides to do, then I lose all sense of urgency that was set up before. There's really no easy way to do this. I can't imagine the Kids WB channel allowing anyone to do a large epic storyline that spans multiple episodes over the course of an entire season, even if that was seemingly what was set up in the opening of this season. So they are still going to do standalone episodes like this one because that's just what cartoons do. Part of it is no doubt the executives underestimating the intelligence of their audiences. But why? When I was 9 or 10 years old, I watched Digimon, and that show was definitely built on a long-form storyline for part of an entire season. Why is this so out of the question for a season that is only 13 episodes long? And let me just put this out there. I don't mind standalone adventures like this one. In fact, if you've ever heard me talk about comic books before on this channel, there's a very good chance you've heard me complain about comics that cannot be more self-contained than what they are, either crossing over needlessly with other series, or an arc that could be told in 3 issues instead being told over the course of 9. Stuff like that, it's my bread and butter on this channel. It aggravates me at least once a day. So I am not going to sit here and say that this show should stop doing the one thing that I think comic books need to mimic from cartoons and live-action television. But I feel like if you're going to try to set up a season-long story, and you are also going to try and do standalone episodes that have nothing to do with that story, then perhaps you should figure out some way to make that work. Explain why half the Legion isn't chasing after Imperiex. Maybe Cosmic Boy doesn't believe in the threat that Superman from the future described. Maybe he has his own band of Legionnaires who are loyal to him, and then Lightning Lad and the main characters who aren't really in this episode, they could be off fighting Imperiex. Yes, we are told that they are fighting the Dominators in this episode, but despite the fact that Imperiex made some kind of alliance with the Dominators in the previous episode, I'm still not convinced that this is trying to tie in with the overall storyline, or if it's just a throwaway line. I just wish we had something to explain why the Legion isn't off busting their butts searching for Imperiex after this show made such a big deal out of him as a threat. Overall, I enjoyed this episode conceptually a little more than I did in execution. I am interested in seeing how this show tries to balance out the arc and the standalone episodes in the future. And hey, even if I didn't absolutely love everything about this episode, I do think this season is a marked improvement over Season 1. It's truly a shame that this series got canceled after 2 seasons, because it really does feel like it's starting to find its footing in this season. So anyway, those are my thoughts for this episode. I hope you enjoyed the episode and the review, and if you did, be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe. And if you like this kind of video, next week I'll be talking about an episode of Batman the Animated Series, and the following week I'll return to talk about another episode of the Legion of Superheroes. And throughout the week I'll have all kinds of videos for you guys to check out. See you then.